In the 1690s, Scotland faced a decade of cold, the worst in 750 years. Crops failed 4 years in a row. Up to 15% of the population starved, and desperate families ate grass to survive. Cut off from colonial trade, the entire nation gambled a quarter of its wealth on one audacious plan: a colony in Panama. It promised salvation, but it triggered a catastrophe so absolute it erased Scotland's independence and created Great Britain. How did one disaster set the stage for an empire? And why did an entire country risk everything on a single hope? In the heart of the 1690s, Scotland became a nation under siege from the climate itself. Year after year, the fields yielded almost nothing. For 4 consecutive seasons, harvests failed. Winter after winter, the cold bit deeper than anyone could remember. Historians now call it the coldest decade in 7.5 centuries. The land could not feed its people. Hunger swept through every parish from the borders to the highlands. Between 5 and 15% of the population died. Tens of thousands lost to starvation and disease. In the towns and along the roads, more than 200,000 Scots wandered as beggars searching for scraps, chewing on grass and roots just to stay alive. The old and the young fell first. Families broke apart. Entire villages emptied. Yet even as famine gripped the countryside, another force tightened its hold. England's Navigation Acts, designed to protect its own merchants, barred Scottish ships from trading with the colonies. No tobacco from Virginia, no sugar from Barbados, no chance to buy or sell in the markets that made London rich. Scotland was fenced out, treated as a foreign land by its own king's other kingdom. The ports of Leith and Glasgow watched English ships pass by, forbidden to join the wealth flowing across the Atlantic. With crops failing at home and trade locked abroad, Scotland's future narrowed to a single, desperate question. How could a starving, isolated nation survive? When every door seemed closed, the answer for many would come in the form of a wild, risky dream, a colony on the far side of the world. The Company of Scotland trading to Africa and the Indies was born out of hunger and hope. In Edinburgh, the subscription book opened on a cold February morning in 1696. Word spread quickly. This was no scheme for a handful of nobles. Merchants, lairds, lawyers, widows, and tenant farmers lined up to invest. Some put in their family savings, others pawned heirlooms or borrowed against their land. By the end of 6 months, the company had raised £400,000, a quarter of all the money in Scotland. It was a sum that defied the reality of famine and isolation. Every lowland town, every clan, every church seemed to have a stake. The scale was staggering. In London and Hamburg, early interest from foreign investors collapsed after English politicians and the East India Company intervened. The Scots pressed on alone, driven by pride and the promise of a new beginning. At the heart of it all stood William Paterson, a man with a vision as grand as it was dangerous. Paterson, already famous for helping found the Bank of England, promised a shortcut to the riches of the world, a colony on the narrow isthmus of Panama, where the Atlantic and Pacific were separated by only 80 kilometers. He spoke of ships laden with silk and spices, of Scotland reborn as a trading power. The idea gripped the nation. Meetings in smoky taverns and crowded kirk halls echoed with talk of Caledonia, the name chosen for the new settlement. With the company chartered by the Scottish Parliament and the money in hand, preparations began at a feverish pace. Shipyards in Leith hammered out new vessels. Supplies were gathered, contracts were signed, lists were drawn up. There was no turning back. A nation on the edge of ruin had bet its future on a strip of jungle thousands of miles away, united by hope and desperation, and by the promise of a place in the world. November 2nd, 1698. The first Scottish ships dropped anchor in Caledonia Bay, Panama, after 4 months at sea. Hopes ran high, but the land that greeted them was nothing like the dream. Dense jungle pressed in on every side, and the air buzzed with mosquitoes. Rain fell almost daily, turning the ground to swamp. There was no safe harbor for the ships, and no clear source of fresh water. The site had been chosen from the pages of a buccaneer's travelogue. William Paterson himself had never set foot in Panama before the landing. Unloading the cargo revealed the first disaster. The holds brimmed with woolen cloth, tartan, wigs, and Bibles, goods meant for European winters, not the tropics. The local Kuna people watched in confusion as the Scots tried to trade heavy coats and religious tracts for fruit or fish. No one wanted what the Company of Scotland had brought. Food stores, already spoiled by the journey, began to rot in the heat. The settlers built Fort St. Andrew, mounting 50 cannons on earthworks that quickly turned to mud. But the fort's walls could not keep out the real enemy. Malaria and yellow fever swept through the camp. The only water came from rain barrels or shallow wells tainted by the swamp. Every day, a dozen colonists died, sometimes more. By spring, the death toll had reached into the hundreds. The council, set up to govern the colony, rotated so often that no one could take charge for long. Arguments broke out over rations, discipline, and blame. The jungle closed in. Supplies vanished, leadership faltered, and disease did the rest. Within months, Caledonia was already beginning to die. April 8th, 1699. In London, the Privy Council issued a royal order that would seal the fate of the Darien colony. By command of King William III, every English governor in the Americas, including Jamaica, Barbados, Virginia, and New York, received strict instructions. No Scottish ship was to be given food, water, or even a safe harbor. Any official who helped the starving colonists would answer for it at their utmost peril. Ships from Caledonia, desperate for supplies, were turned away at every port. The king who ruled over both Scotland and England had chosen to protect English peace and profits, leaving his Scottish subjects to face hunger and disease alone. Back in Scotland, hope refused to die. News of the first colony's struggle was slow to arrive, and the Company of Scotland pressed ahead with a second expedition. In August, 1,300 men, women, and children set out. Among them were entire families, a schoolmaster, and the promise of a permanent settlement. They carried with them the last of Scotland's wealth and the dreams of a nation. On November 30th, 1699, the Second Fleet reached Caledonia Bay. Instead of a bustling outpost, they found silence. The jungle had swallowed the huts, and the earth was broken by hundreds of graves, roughly 400 in all. The air hung heavy with the memory of those who had come before. Survivors' logs speak of shock and disbelief as they realized the full cost. The new arrivals stepped ashore not into a colony, but into a cemetery. In that moment, hope gave way to grief. The disaster was now complete, and every Scottish family who had sent a loved one to Darien would pay the price. Bankruptcy swept through Scotland like a second famine. The Darien disaster wiped out a quarter of the nation's liquid wealth. £400,000 vanished, and with it, the hopes of thousands. Only 3 ships out of 13 ever limped home. 2,000 Scottish men, women, and children were dead. Survivors returned as outcasts, shunned by their own families. In Edinburgh and Glasgow, anger boiled over into riots. The Company of Scotland collapsed, its ledgers filled with names and losses. London then offered a bargain, nearly £398,085, a payment so precise it matched the Darien losses almost to the pound. This so-called equivalent was not a gift, but a price, compensation for investors and a silent bribe for politicians. The disaster that emptied Scotland's coffers left it with nothing to bargain but its independence. On January 16, 1707, the Scottish Parliament gathered for its most consequential vote. 110 members cast their ballots for union with England. 69 stood against. With that, 3 centuries of Scottish sovereignty ended in a single afternoon. The Alien Act still loomed, threatening to choke off what little trade remained. But for those who voted yes, the promise of compensation, almost £400,000 and nearly matching the Darien losses, offered a lifeline to ruined fortunes and empty coffers. The ink on the Treaty of Union was barely dry when doors to the English Empire swung open. Scots, once locked out of colonial trade, now found themselves eligible for the highest posts in the new imperial order. Over the next century, Scottish names would fill the ranks of governors, generals, and merchants across Britain's far-flung territories, their influence stretching far beyond what anyone in that Edinburgh chamber could have imagined. The borders drawn by empire still shape conflicts and alliances today, traced back to a gamble that bankrupted a nation. As power shifts in our own era, the cost of miscalculation remains just as high. History rarely forgives mistakes on this scale. What lessons do we carry forward?